Hey guys and girls, it's Cindy. So my topic that I've done some research on extensively, someone had requested in one of my comments on previous videos that I do a video on the topic of blood transfusions. So my approach to this was to do some research about some real cases where Jehovah's Witnesses were in a medical situation which would have required blood transfusion to be administered. And in some cases, they won their court cases to refuse, and in other cases, they lost. And I found some stories that kind of go along with the results of what happened in either case. I also did some research in the publications of Jehovah's Witnesses about what is the basis, what are the scriptural basis for the witnesses to refuse blood transfusion. So I go over some of the scriptures that they use frequently, and then some quotations from the What Does the Bible Really Teach book. I believe it's chapter 13, and some quotations from a Watchtower article in 1991, and then some thought-provoking questions that just popped into my mind that I'm sharing with you. And I don't make a conclusion one way or the other in this video, but the questions kind of lean towards what my feeling is on the subject, and everyone is free to make their own decision based on their own research. So getting started, I'll read you some of the experiences that I came across on online news. The first one is out of South Africa from the Sunday Times, December 5th, 2018. The article was entitled, "Blood Transfusions Are Not in the Bible, Father Tells Court." It says, a KwaZulu-Natal father told the Durban High Court on Wednesday that his 3-year-old daughter should not receive life-saving blood as it is not in the Bible. This father is among 3 sets of Jehovah's Witness parents who have been taken to court. The children were suffering from sickle cell anemia, where the red blood cells contort into a sickle shape, causing them to die early. This blocks blood flow and causes severe pain, and in some cases stroke and death. The children did not receive blood following the court order because their condition had improved. There are other articles connected to this one, so again, you can do your own research. The next article I read was out of Montreal in Canada under CBC News, September 21st, 2017. Jehovah's Witness 14 ordered to receive blood transfusion despite beliefs. The McGill University Health Care Center has been authorized to perform blood transfusions to treat a 14-year-old girl with cancer. She had Hodgkin's lymphoma, swelling in the neck, armpits, or groin, fatigue, fever, weight loss, and stage 4 lymphoma is incurable. It didn't state in this article which stage this girl was in, but it did say, despite her refusal, they still ordered her to receive the blood transfusion, and that this had gone against her religious beliefs. It said Superior Court Justice concluded it is unlawful to protect a child. Oh, sorry, I misquoted that. The Superior Court Justice concluded it is lawful to protect a child, sometimes even against their own wishes, when their decision can be fatal or irreversibly alter their lives. The doctor tried to avoid having to give a blood transfusion, but after the 3rd round of chemotherapy, he grew increasingly concerned that she would require one because of her low platelet count, which could lead to fatal hemorrhaging. In a 6-1 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that a minor should have the opportunity to make decisions of a medical nature, but that the court must have the power to intervene when a human life is in danger. The next article I found was from Melbourne, Australia, September 2nd, 2018, and the article was Pregnant Jehovah's Witness Teen Loses Fight to Refuse Blood Transfusion. Notice it said Pregnant Jehovah's Witness Teen. That's kind of relevant later in the article. So it says a JW girl may be forced to receive a blood transfusion against her will this weekend when she gives birth. Mercy Hospital Victoria was granted Supreme Court authority to give the girl blood as a last resort if she suffers a postpartum hemorrhage when induced into labor on Sunday. The 17-year-old first-time mom was considered at risk because she is small in stature and the baby was large, which could require a C-section. The Human Tissues Act has a provision that minors can be given blood without parental consent, but in 1994, this ruling was edited with the concept of a mature minor could make up their own mind. However, child psychiatrist Campbell Paul didn't believe the girl had the decision-making capacity in this case. Why? Can you guess? He stated that the girl had been through considerable disruption and trauma through her life and had transgressed a major value of her family and her community of Jehovah's Witnesses by having premarital sex. He said, you could imagine that she feels very frightened about further punishment and consequences. In a statement the girl's mother read to the court, she said, being forced to have that done against her will would be something like having violence done to her or being raped. She wants to do the right thing by Jehovah. The judge concluded, I do not consider that allowing her, in effect, to choose to die is in her best interest. In another article that was written 2 weeks later, an ex-Jehovah's Witness was interviewed and said she probably believes she will not get a resurrection if she takes blood and dies, and if she doesn't die, she may be killed by God at Armageddon for disobeying this law. So the next article that I have is from Pennsylvania, the Penn Live Patriot News, entitled Family of Jehovah's Witness Who Died After Refusing Blood Transfusion Can't Keep Suing Doctors. This is from July 19, 2017. The family of a Jehovah's Witness who died after repeatedly refusing blood transfusions can't sue the hospital where doctors begged for a chance to save her life, a state appeal court ruled. This is the summary of the story without reading the whole article. A woman by the name of Terry Seals Davila, a Jehovah's Witness missionary serving with her husband in Nicaragua, chose Hahnemann University Hospital to care for her childbirth in November 2010 because of its bloodless medicine program. Her treatment plan called for recycling her own blood through a hemodilution machine and coursing it back through her body. But when complications of her delivery required a C-section, she developed internal bleeding. She, her husband, and her family refused blood transfusions. The court filing states, because she was okay with whatever happened, quote unquote. She died 4 days later. Then, 3 years later, her family sued for malpractice and lost. There were multiple other cases. All of them are just terrible examples and illustrations of how unreasonable and unjustified the Jehovah's Witness community is in their decision-making process. Canada BBC News, Jehovah's Witness within rights to refuse blood transfusion. 2 Jehovah's Witness women died within days of each other after complications of C-section. One 27-year-old and one 46-year-old refused blood. In London, UK, in July 2019, a judge approves blood transfusion for a gravely ill baby son of Jehovah's Witness. The High Court ruled that it was in the best interest of a 3-week-old boy who was gravely ill and could die without medical intervention, because the medical team needed to intervene because the parents were refusing to save their son's life by means of a blood transfusion. Another UK example in June 2019, judge orders doctors to give Jehovah's Witness girl a blood transfusion against parents' wishes. The High Court ruled a 5-year-old girl, another with sickle cell disease, from a JW family can be given a blood transfusion against her parents' wishes. The parents said their religious beliefs would not allow them to consent, and the girl's father broke down as he told the judge that he wanted his daughter to live, but could not agree to a transfusion. In Cape Town, Africa, in September 2019, this is just a few days ago on the 10th of September, Jehovah's Witness parents refused blood transfusion and child died. A Wynberg hospital surgeon recounted a horrendous story after a long night in the operating room. He worked all night to save the life of a young boy whose parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, trying to keep the child alive. The parents were standing outside and were warned repeatedly that he wouldn't survive without blood. They constantly refused. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the child died. So unfortunately, these are all tragic examples of cases where the court system, the legal system had to become involved to try to intervene to save the life, the precious life of people of all ages, young children, adults under serious emergencies. And in every case, they defiantly stood against the medical teams because of their religious convictions to refuse blood transfusions. So it begs the question, what scriptural basis do the Jehovah's Witnesses use for their strong convictions and their strong stand against blood transfusions? The first scripture is from Genesis 9:4, where Jehovah is quoted as saying, "Only flesh with its life, its blood, you must not eat." This was spoken to Noah after they came out of the ark, and he was given the new understanding that they could eat meat, but they had to drain the blood on the ground. The next scripture is from Leviticus chapter 17 and verses 10 and 14. After this is in the context of laying down the rules surrounding animal sacrifices for the Mosaic Law. And he said, "If any man of the house of Israel or any foreigner who is residing in your midst eats any sort of blood, I will set my face against that one who is eating blood, and I will cut him off from among his people. The life is in the blood." In Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 23, he said, "Just be firmly resolved not to eat the blood, because the blood is the life or soul, and you must not eat the life or soul with the flesh." And then in Acts chapter 15, verses 28 and 29, when they were considering some dissension among the congregations and the first century Christians, this is not long after Jesus had died, and they were now establishing the Christian congregation. Yet many people were still adhering to the Mosaic Law and its traditions. So they said here in verse 28 and 29, "For the Holy Spirit and we ourselves have favored adding no further burden to you except these necessary things, to keep abstaining from things sacrificed to idols, from blood, from what is strangled, and from sexual immorality. If you carefully keep yourselves from these things, you will prosper." And then it's interesting, it says good health to you. So they were interested in the health and well-being of the people that they were delivering this message to. And just for context, if you look at verse 19 and the surrounding verses, you can see this is, again, something that they were adhering to based on the law that they were doing for the Sabbath and other Mosaic Law standards. So the question is, how does God view life? How does God feel about sustaining life and preserving life? In chapter 13 of the Jehovah's Witness study publication, What Does the Bible Really Teach? Some of the verses that they cite are from Revelation chapter 4, verse 11. And partially from that verse, it says that because of your will, because of God's will, all of the things that he created came into existence and were created. In Acts chapter 17, verse 28, it says, "For by him we have life and move and exist, for we are also his children." Excuse me. In Deuteronomy 5:17, very plainly states, you must not murder. Murder is defined as the crime of unlawfully killing a person or taking their life away against the law, where it's not our right to do so. I'll put on the page some citations from several paragraphs throughout the study. Paragraph 11, again, kind of repeats the command that was given to the Israelites that they should not eat the blood. They should not consume it and take it into their mouths. As part of the law stated, the life was in the blood. The blood was sacred. It belonged to Jehovah, and so it had to be poured out and given back to Jehovah. Paragraph 13, so that I don't have to kind of pause for long periods of time. If you want to read the illustrations that I put on the page, you can pause the video and then continue when you're finished at your leisure. Paragraph 13 uses the illustration and the photo aid of somebody who is told that they shouldn't consume alcohol, that they shouldn't take alcohol because it's detrimental to their health, because perhaps they're an alcoholic. And the illustrations aside the picture also says, if you're told to abstain from alcohol, would it be okay to inject it into your veins? And when I really, I don't know how many times I went through this study publication with other students when I was a Jehovah's Witness, and how I thought how apt it was, how fitting it was to use this illustration, because if we were told not to eat candy as a diabetic, would we inject sugar into our veins? Or if we're an alcoholic, would we inject alcohol into our veins? But then not long after I started the research process and kind of critical thinking and other personal study on my own, when I faced the same question, the first thing that popped in my head is, who does that? Who would do that? Nobody would take alcohol and inject it into their veins, or sugar and inject it into their veins. And then in paragraph 15, it asks the question, why would we want to extend our life during this system of things and then lose our chance of life in the new system to come by disobeying God's command to abstain from blood? This made me really think. Jesus, on a number of occasions, did extend the life of people here on earth during this worldly system of things. He resurrected Lazarus. He resurrected Jairus' daughter. He resurrected so many others, and there were other examples of resurrections throughout the scriptures. So this is, again, faulty reasoning of why we wouldn't accept blood transfusions to extend our lives, because Jesus himself restored people's lives during this system of things, because their loved ones wanted to be reunited with them and extend the time they were able to spend with them. We should have that same motivating force in making the decision whether or not to accept blood transfusions. Proverbs 8:31 tells us that those that God and Jesus were especially fond of were mankind. They value the life of mankind. Job 34:10 says that it is unthinkable for the true God to act wickedly, for the Almighty to do wrong. 2 Peter 3:9 tells us that God does not desire anyone to be destroyed or to lose their life. Luke 12:7 explains to us that we're valuable to God by using the illustration that our hairs of our heads are numbered. Can you imagine? God knows how many hairs I have on my head. That's ridiculous. And it also says that we're worth more than many sparrows. So he places a high value on our lives. Genesis 50 verse 20, when Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers, they had given his father a garment that was soaked in blood. Actually, it was the blood of a lion. But his father presumed him dead based on that. And they were worried that he would be seeking revenge. And his words to them were that God intended it to turn out well. This is Genesis 50, verse 20. And to preserve many people alive. So again, in this case, it's not necessarily a direct correlation to the subject matter, but again, it's just reiterating the fact that God would go to great lengths and great means to preserve the life of humankind because he loved them so much. I've located this quotation from the Watchtower, 1991, June 15th, on page 8, paragraph 2. It's stated, "Our life depends on blood, which carries oxygen throughout our body. It removes carbon dioxide, lets us adapt to changes in temperature, and helps us to fight diseases. The one who provided our life also designed and provided the marvelous life-sustaining liquid tissue called blood." So again, this is a gift, a treasure that we should hold at the same standard, the very high value that Jehovah placed on it when he gave it as a gift to us. So some thought-provoking questions that I had in relation to this topic. If Jehovah was strictly against the saving or preservation of life by means of blood transfusions, why did he allow imperfect but intelligent humankind in the medical profession the insight and the education to not only learn how to transfuse blood back into the body, but also to be able to cleanse and wash the blood? And not only that, but to be able to determine and distinguish the 8 different blood types for compatibility and matching during critical surgeries. Why would he not block this knowledge as he did when he confused the languages at Babel, when he was against the people's actions at that time? Another question, are the hospital liaison committees, the members that are sent in as mediators and educators to the medical professionals, are they sent in to stand in as spokespeople for our beliefs and our convictions, or are they sent in as JW spies to report any who disobey the instruction to refuse blood transfusions? How unbalanced is the thinking that, based on 1 Corinthians chapter 6:11, that men and women can be forgiven for murder, violence, immorality, child molestation, but accepting a blood transfusion to save the precious life of yourself or a loved one would forever condemn you to the wrath of Jehovah? Some other references that I would highly recommend looking into are the book Crisis of Conscience by Ray Franz. If you look at pages 120 to 121 in his book, he speaks of the example of hemophiliacs, and during that time they were given the factor 8 kind of remedy or treatment that would help reduce, I believe it reduced inflammation and helped the blood circulation for hemophiliacs. Again, I'm very uneducated where that's concerned, but I highly recommend reading that portion, but also the entire book from Ray Franz, Crisis of Conscience. And also Lloyd Evans covers the topic in his book, The Reluctant Apostate, in chapter 9 called Blood and Tears, regarding vaccination. It says that vaccination was banned for witnesses right up to 1952, when a watchtower admitted the matter was for the individual that had to face it to decide for himself. And then also from 1967 through 1980, organ transplants were forbidden, were thought of as, or even spoken of as, cannibalism. And then this is a quote from a section of his book in that chapter. What about all of the children who died due to not being vaccinated before 1952? Or what recourse is there for all who died refusing organ transplants between 1967 to 1980? How are these victims or their families to be compensated for Watchtower's blunder in trying to determine and dictate God's will in this area? All valid questions. And finally, the last question I have is, why is it a conscience matter to accept blood fractions but not a blood transfusion? A nice illustration that a friend of mine shared with me, Andy Pohl. She said, an apple does not become something else if it's chopped into slices or mashed into sauce or squeezed into juice. It's still an apple. If you were allergic to an apple, and if it would actually mean life or death to consume it, you wouldn't accept it in any form. So why would then Jehovah's Witnesses make it a conscience matter to accept fractions but not blood if it's such a serious life or death matter for witnesses? And finally, just a few points to summarize the main idea on the topic of blood. Number one, Jehovah God is the giver of life, our creator, and the only rightful owner to be able to take our life, which is in the blood. And anyone else who would take responsibility to end a life, to withhold blood, would in essence be a murderer, as we defined earlier. And the second point is, during the times of sacrifices under the Jewish Mosaic law, the blood was to be poured out on the ground, not to be eaten. And again, in Acts, when they were told to abstain from blood, this still pertained to that same law, the Mosaic law, that many people were still following at that time, not to burden them with any other constricts of the law, but just to abstain from eating the blood, consuming it through their mouth. During Bible times, it wasn't even a thought or a question in the medical profession that they could transfuse the blood, because this didn't actually occur until probably the beginning of the 19th century. So it wouldn't have been written about in the scriptures directly regarding not accepting blood transfusions through intravenous means. And finally, last but not least, by any means, we know the Bible refers to Jehovah as a God of love. God is love. It tells us that mankind was made in his image, and that God loves us so much that he gave his son. So if that's the case, if we're made in his image, it should be natural for all of humankind to want to save the life of another fellow human by any means possible, at all cost, as God would do. So why do Jehovah's Witnesses lack that natural affection for other humans, especially for precious loved ones and family members, by refusing blood transfusions? So I hope that I did this topic justice for anybody that was curious about the topic. I hope that you continue to do your own research on this topic or whatever other questions that you have. And if you are interested in other topics being reviewed by me, I enjoy the research and the study. It's something that I really miss, but I'm still making it part of my routine to continue to study the Bible And it's quite interesting to do this independent, although in this case I used a lot of the Watchtower literature and quotations, and I used their Bible translation, the New World Translation. However, I do enjoy kind of looking at the Bible from a different angle and not being held to these very rigid and narrow beliefs and standards as far as what God really, what the motive of the Bible is and what the message is, which is love. Ultimately, it's love. And is it loving for us to want to lose our own life or the life of a loved one because somebody is misinterpreting a scripture that says to abstain from blood or to not consume it? I don't think that's loving. And so it's out of love, out of compassion for anybody that's interested in viewing my videos that I shared this information with you. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing other videos on any topics that you might be interested in. So I will talk